Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a breakthrough study out of Northwestern University that exposes a massive, honestly shocking gap in our public health data. We're talking about a topic that touches the very core of family life, yet practically nobody is talking about it. It's the hidden public health crisis surrounding the survival of new fathers. To really get a handle on this, we've got to contrast two completely different approaches to public health. Think about it. It took the better part of a century for maternal mortality to be fully recognized as the urgent crisis it is. Today, we have review committees focusing deeply on mothers during that critical first year after birth. But when it comes to fathers, well, their mortality is largely uncounted. It is a complete national blind spot, and the health of new dads remains a total mystery in our data.
So let's get into Chapter 1, a public health blind spot.
To truly understand why this lack of data matters so much, we first have to look at the very real human stakes. Dr. Craig Garfield, a professor at Northwestern University, points out something absolutely crucial. He says the death of any parent has enormous consequences. The tragedy, it isn't just the lost life, it's the massive, cascading impact that a parent's sudden absence has on a developing child, especially during those incredibly vulnerable early years.
Now, Dr. Garfield's drive to uncover this data didn't just appear out of nowhere. It came directly from his own experiences as a pediatrician. While working in the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, he realized he was frequently encountering heartbreaking situations where mothers of newborns were suddenly coping with the death of their partners. These men were dying from shootings, car accidents, and other really sudden causes. Actually, he realized he was seeing this happen even more often than mothers dying. Yet when he went looking for the data, he found almost zero research tracking these fathers' deaths in the years immediately following a child's birth.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, the Georgia study findings. To finally get some concrete answers, the research team published a massive, absolutely first-of-its-kind study in JAMA Pediatrics. They looked at a staggering number of babies, over 130,000. That's literally every single birth in the state of Georgia in 2017. They then took those birth records and linked them directly to death certificates, tracking the mortality of the fathers over a full 5-year period, right up through 2022.
So out of all of the fathers tracked over those 5 years, 796 died. But here's the staggering discovery. 60% of those deaths were entirely preventable. Compare that to the 40% from natural causes. The researchers specifically call this a huge missed opportunity. Think about it. We have robust systems in place to review maternal deaths, but absolutely nothing to understand or prevent these paternal ones. When we look at a tragic breakdown of those 470 preventable deaths, it reveals that these young men are disproportionately dying from violence, accidents, and mental health struggles. Homicide leads the pack at 143 deaths, followed closely by accidental injury at 142, then suicide and overdose. It really paints a very specific and highly alarming picture of the kinds of dangers facing new fathers today.
Let's move on to Chapter 3, the fatherhood paradox. Seeing those tragic numbers, you might just assume becoming a father is a purely dangerous biological transition period. We really have to ask ourselves, is the sheer stress of new parenthood what's actually killing these men? Does becoming a dad intrinsically increase your risk of dying during those early years of a child's life?
Well, the data holds a major twist. The answer to that question is a resounding no. In fact, after age 20, the death rate for fathers is consistently lower than for men who aren't fathers. To put that into perspective, for men aged 30 to 34 in Georgia, the death rate was 231 per 100,000 non-fathers. But for fathers in that exact same age bracket, it literally plummeted to just 120. Fatherhood doesn't increase the risk, it actually correlates with a much, much lower mortality rate overall.
This led Dr. Garfield to a truly fascinating conclusion. He notes that being a father appears to be protective in this particular group of men, and they were surprised to see reduced mortality. Now, while researchers don't know the exact mechanism yet, they theorize that fatherhood acts sort of like a shield. Maybe it brings a new sense of purpose, or prompts healthier lifestyle choices, or introduces new roles and responsibilities that essentially keep these guys safer.
All right, Chapter 4, Social Vulnerability and Risk.
This brings up a pretty critical contradiction. If fatherhood is ultimately protective, why on earth are so many young dads still dying from preventable causes? Well, the answer is that paternal mortality, much like maternal mortality, is heavily dictated by social factors and the environment around the family. These deaths are shaped far less by biology and much more by social vulnerability. Understanding who is most vulnerable is absolutely key to protecting these families. The study revealed a very stark demographic divide.
Non-natural deaths occurred a lot more frequently among younger fathers, non-Hispanic Black fathers, unmarried men, those living in rural areas, and those relying on Medicaid. Significantly, factors like Medicaid-paid births and unmarried status were specifically and tragically linked to a much higher homicide risk.
Conversely, the data also highlighted what actually offers a layer of protection. Lower risks of death were consistently linked to having higher education, being of Hispanic ethnicity, and having a TRICARE paid birth, which is the military health coverage system. This strongly reinforces the idea that social determinants and access to resources play a massive, undeniable role in whether a new father survives those early years.
And that brings us to Chapter 5, Why George's Data Matters.
Throughout this explainer, you might be sitting there wondering why this incredibly groundbreaking research is entirely focused on just one single state. I mean, why can't we just run these exact same numbers for California, Texas, New York, and get a true national picture? Well, the massive barrier here is simply how we handle data in the United States. While birth and death data are collected at the state level, once that data is aggregated at the national level, all personally identifiable information is stripped right out to protect privacy. Because this national data is completely anonymized, researchers simply cannot connect the dots. It becomes literally impossible to link a specific individual father's death certificate to the recent birth record of his child. The mechanism to track this nationally, it just doesn't exist right now. In fact, the only reason the Northwestern team could bypass this massive roadblock is thanks to a very unique pilot program called the Prems for Dad Survey, which launched in Georgia back in 2018. That existing project finally gave researchers access to identifiable, state-level data so they could track the 2017 to 2022 timeframe. And now researchers are using this massive success as a template, calling for other states to analyze their own data so we can eventually piece together a cohesive national system.
All of this leaves us with an incredibly powerful mandate from Dr. Garfield and his team. If we don't measure it, we can't change it. That affects thousands of children. The blind spot has been identified. Now the real work begins to build the systems necessary to track, understand, and ultimately prevent these senseless tragedies.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really consider what we value and what we count as a society. Simply by looking at the data a little differently, an entire, devastating hidden crisis was revealed. It forces us to ask, what are the other hidden vulnerabilities of modern parenthood? And if we truly can't change what we don't measure, what else are we choosing not to measure right now?